Part 2 of Imperialism. In 1894, China and Japan go to war. They competed for trading rights in Korea. Japan starts a war, or they declare war on each other in 1894, and Japan would defeat China, and they take over Korea and Manchuria. China will get Manchuria back, and then they lose it again in 1931. Korea will remain in Japanese possession until the end of World War II, until 1945. So the Russo-Japanese War. Russia tries to step in and take control of Korea and Manchuria from Japan, and Japan and Russia go to war in 1904-1905 in the Russo-Japanese War. Japan defeats Russia, and Japan will become a world power out of this, but this will be the first time a European power is defeated by an Asiatic power in modern day times, dating back to the Mongolian era in the 1300s. So we have some resistance to imperialism. That would be the natives of these imperialized places, as you see here. So natives of Africa, Asia, and Oceania, they like the improvements made by the imperialist rulers, like roads, railroad, schools, peace, etc., but they disliked the way they were treated by the rulers. They wanted to rule themselves. They disliked the racism of imperialist nations. They felt foreign culture was being forced on them. Sometimes they fight against imperialism. Most natives were easily defeated. When it says easily defeated, most natives, like in Africa, were using bows, arrows, and spears to a gunfight. When it says they were defeated easily, I do take a little bit of exception to that, because a lot of these people fought valiantly. They fought extremely well. They were just outpowered technologically. So industrialized nations were more united, and they had better weapons and technology at the end of the day. Not to mention, like in the U.S., we do have the Anti-Imperialist League. Is it the American way to impose our way upon other people? Those kind of values and those things were going on over here. So, as I said, some natives do put up a fierce fight. Europeans in South Africa. The Dutch established a colony in South Africa in the early 1600s. After defeating the Dutch in the Boer Wars in the 1880s and early 20th century, Great Britain took control of South Africa. So I believe the last Boer War ended in 1902, and Britain loses, I think, right at 600,000 men, 400 to 600,000 men. Very bloody war. The Zulu Wars. The British and the Zulu natives, a tribe of southern Africa, South Africa, they fought war over land. The Zulus put up a fierce fight and won some major battles, even though they were fighting with spears against guns. Eventually, the British overwhelmed them and defeated the Zulus to take control of their land. In India, the crown jewel, it was considered for the British crown, the British Empire. So the British East India Company was given permission by the British government to run the colony of India. Indian soldiers that the East India Company hired were called sepoys to protect the company's business interests. Most sepoys were Muslim or Hindu. Indians did not have the same rights as British citizens. Many British, of course, will look down on Indians because of their race. So in 1858, we get the Sepoy Rebellion. And the Sepoys were ordered to use a new type of rifle. The cartridge was rumored to be made out of cow or pig fat, and you had to rip the cartridge open with your mouth. So they refused to do this because this goes against their religion. And they refused these orders. Hindus believed cows were sacred animals, and Muslims believed that pigs were unclean, so they would not obey and open the cartridges this way. The Sepoys rioted, captured part of India. It took over a year for the British to regain control of India. The results for this rebellion: it was unsuccessful for the Indians. The British government took full control of India. Indian nationalism and the desire for independence will grow throughout the years, and British mistreatment of Indians grew as well. In China, go back. In China, as you see, Europeans will set up what is called spheres of influence. It's the use of military and economic power to control large areas of China. So the European powers are not going to carve out like permanent colonies. They carve out what is called spheres of influence, and they're going to use their military and economic power to influence these areas. So, Great Britain wanted to get involved with China. China benefited from a trade surplus. Britain bought a lot of Chinese tea, but the Chinese didn't need anything from Britain. So China made a lot of money off of Britain, and Britain wanted to find something that the Chinese had to have. So what did they find? Well, in India, they grow opium. And so the British began trading opium with China. The Chinese become addicted. Nobles and leaders in China would literally kill people they saw even doing the drug. The Chinese leadership and the nobility knew that this was ruining their culture, and they begged Britain to stop doing this, but the British would not. They said, hey, it's their right to trade. In China, if you were suspected of trading opium, you were killed on the spot. You didn't get a trial in an effort to try to wipe this drug out. So what happens in 1839? Britain and the Chinese go to war, and it's called the Opium Wars from 1839 to 1842. And keep in mind, the U.S. does support Britain in this. It will be a U.S. victory basically because of superior military technology, and this will force China to become a victim of imperialism, where there's going to be spheres of influence carved out in China. I can't overestimate enough. You need to understand Britain is the drug dealer and China is the druggie, and Britain refuses to let up on trading with this drug with China simply because it made them money. I don't know what this thing just did. There you go. The Treaty of Nanjing ends the Opium War in 1842. The Chinese were forced to accept British terms of surrender. The spheres of influence would be created, and this would be areas in which foreign countries could trade and had special economic privileges in these areas of China. There you go. You'll see in that map there's some spheres of influence there, or you'll see the ports that are open. So of course, the Chinese wanted reform with hopes of kicking other nations out of China. They wanted to learn the Western way of life to control foreigners. Rebellions and unrest last for about 50, 60 years. Many were supportive of reform, others resisted it altogether. So in the early 1900s, the Chinese government was very weak and could not keep up with other countries, or could not keep other countries from taking control of its ports. Basically, the U.S. passes this thing, the open door policy. It's a policy of allowing all other nations access to China in trade, and we would only recognize China as the nation we're going to trade with in China. Foreign countries control trade and had a great deal of influence in China, but we wanted to trade with China. We're not interested in trading with the British Chinese company or whatever. So missionaries were sent, of course, to China to convert Chinese people to Christianity, and that's mainly from Britain and later on the U.S. But what it's going to lead to is the Boxer Rebellion. And here's the Boxer Rebellion. The Chinese view of Europeans, they viewed the Europeans as very barbaric, It called them white devils. Christianity has a double standard to it, and that is in God's name we can kill you, or in God's name we can save you. And people throughout the world with different religions see this religion as not so good. They see it as a bad religion, a double-faced religion, and they don't want it. So the Righteous Harmonious Fists, or the Boxers, it's a group Chinese warriors. As you see, they were called Boxers by the Europeans, and they wanted to end foreign influence in China and the spread of Christianity 100%. Boxers attacked Chinese Christians and killed Chinese Christians and foreigners. In 1900, several nations were sent in to protect their interests. The foreigners will defeat the Boxers, and mainly the Japanese were sent in to put this rebellion down. The results, of course, foreign powers gained even more control of China. Growth in Chinese nationalism will intensify as well. So as you see, China becomes a republic in 1911. It's a Western reform movement. So here's a map of Southeastern Asian colonies. So the French would control this area. It's called French Indochina. Since the 17th century, they had control of some of these areas, and they used direct colonial management. They focused on rice production, but most of it was exported. So the Vietnamese started a resistance to the French as early as 1888. So this whole thing with Vietnam, guys, it dates back really to the 1880s. The three protectorates that became known as French Indochina were Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and you'll see Siam. We'll talk a little bit about that.